Hello. This video provides a brief overview of the Federal Aviation Administration's Notice Criteria tool and 7460-1 process, which is used to assess the impact of proposed development on airspace and airports. Before diving into the FAA's tools and processes, it's important to first understand who is responsible for regulating U.S. airspace and how it is protected. Airspace refers to the environment above ground that aircraft operate within. Congress has vested the FAA with the authority to regulate and manage U.S. airspace. One way in which the FAA manages and protects airspace is by requiring notifications of any proposed new construction or alteration of existing structures that would enter airspace and present a hazard to operating aircraft. This includes the placement of any temporary structures or equipment, such as those needed for construction. Aircraft are most susceptible to these hazards when departing, arriving, or transitioning from an airport. U.S. airspace is expansive, and so the FAA follows Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 77, often referred to simply as Part 77, which defines specific areas around airports that must remain clear of obstructions to protect safety of aircraft operations. These areas are commonly referred to as imaginary surfaces. These areas are three-dimensional in shape, and their size is based on runway length and the type of runway approaches an airport has. This slide includes a couple of illustrations of imaginary surfaces, both a plan and a profile view. Part 77 also specifies the scenarios in which a developer, property owner, or other proponent needs to notify the FAA of any proposed construction or alteration of existing structures. These scenarios include any construction or alteration exceeding 200 feet above the ground, regardless of location. Any construction or alteration that exceeds any of the following imaginary surfaces extending outward and upward at the following slopes. 100 to 1 feet for a horizontal distance of 20,000 feet from the nearest point of the nearest runway measuring more than 3,200 feet in length. 50 to 1 feet for a horizontal distance of 10,000 feet from the nearest point of the nearest runway measuring 3,200 feet or less in length. 25 to 1 feet for a horizontal distance of 5,000 feet from the nearest point of the nearest landing takeoff area of a heliport. These scenarios also include any construction or alteration on an airport. If the proposed structure will emit frequencies and does not meet the conditions of the FAA co-location policy, when otherwise requested by the FAA, and additional scenarios which are outlined in 14 CFR Part 77.9. The 7460 process is the FAA's formal process for being notified of proposed construction or alteration, and includes the use of the form known as FAA Form 7460-1, Notice of Proposed Construction or Alteration. When this form is submitted to the FAA, it triggers an analysis of the proposed structure and determination of whether the proposed structure poses as a hazard to air navigation or not. So when is it required to file a 7460-1 form? The FAA requires submission of this form at least 45 days before the start of proposed construction or alteration, or the date an application for construction permit is filed, whichever is earliest. While 45 days is the official requirement per Part 77, it is recommended that the notice be given 60 to 90 days before planned construction to prevent any delays. Since there are many different scenarios in which a property owner or developer will need to file notice with the FAA created the Notice Criteria tool to make it easier for development proponents to determine if a 7460-1 form needs to be filed for their specific project. Next, we'll demonstrate how the Notice Criteria tool works and demo a couple of sample scenarios. The Notice Criteria tool can be found on the FAA's Obstruction Evaluation Airport Airspace Analysis OEAAA website, found at oeaaa.faa.gov. This website is an all-in-one portal that includes the Notice Criteria tool plus pertinent information such as contact information for the FAA, frequently asked questions, instructions, and desk reference guides for using the Notice Criteria tool or submitting a 7460-1 form, as well as checking the status of any case that the user has submitted. We'll start by looking at the Notice Criteria tool and demonstrate how to use it and interpret the results. The FAA's Notice Criteria tool can be accessed on the OE AAA website, found on the homepage towards the center of the screen. By selecting Please click here to use the FAA's Notice Criteria tool to determine if you meet the requirements to file notice of your construction or alteration. First, select the drop-down for structure type. Several options exist here, including bridges, buildings, cranes, fences, landfills, and many more. Next, input the latitude and longitude of the proposed development site. It is important to be as accurate as possible with coordinates used. The latitude and longitude are entered as degrees, minutes, seconds, and the seconds should include values to the nearest hundredth, between 0 and 59.99. Select which reference system the coordinates were obtained from, either the North American datum of 1983 or the North American datum of 1927. Both coordinate systems can be used, but NAD 83 is the preferred coordinate system by the FAA. Next is the site elevation, which uses height above sea level, not height above ground level. Provide the elevation to the nearest foot. Then provide the structure height, with the height being the max height of the structure, including antennas, ventilation stacks, or max boom height of a crane as examples. Provide the height to the nearest foot. Last, indicate if the proposed structure will be on an airport or off an airport and select Submit. Results will be shown if filing is required or not. The first scenario is a construction site where a crane will be used. The crane has a max height of 65 feet and the construction site is within the vicinity of the example airport as shown by the red pin on the map. While this scenario is for temporary use of construction equipment, the same steps apply if the user scenario included construction of a building or an antenna as examples. The first step is to enter the structure type. In this case, select Crane, Mobile Crane. Next, enter the latitude and longitude of the location where the crane will be operated, which is 32 degrees, 9 minutes, and 0.54 seconds north latitude. The longitude will be 110 degrees, 56 minutes, and 3.99 seconds west longitude. The horizontal datum uses NAD 83, so no changes needed here. Next, enter the site elevation. This is the elevation of the ground above sea level, which for this sample is 2,558 feet. Next, enter the structure height. This is the maximum height of the structure, which is 65 feet. Finally, indicate whether the structure is on or off airport. In this scenario, the crane is located off. Select No and click Submit. Once the user has clicked Submit, results will be displayed. Results show you do not exceed notice criteria, indicating that in this case, the user is not required to file notice via the FAA 7460-1 form. The second scenario involves a 25-foot crane which needs to be placed on top of a 105-foot building to conduct some maintenance. The building is represented by the red pin to the left of the airport as shown in the image. This example is a bit more complex because the user needs to consider the height of the building plus the height of the equipment they'll be operating on top temporarily. Again, the same process applies for other types of proposed development, such as a fence, a bridge, or a building. The first step is to enter the structure type. In this case, select Crane, Mobile Crane. Next, enter the latitude and longitude of the location where the crane will be operated, which is 33 degrees, 26 minutes, and 29.50 seconds north latitude. The longitude will be 112 degrees, 4 minutes, and 1.89 seconds west longitude. The horizontal datum is NAD 83, so again, no changes needed here. Then enter the site elevation. This is the elevation of the ground above sea level, which for this sample is 1,084 feet. Next, enter the maximum structure height, which in this case is 130 feet, taking the height of the building and adding the height of the crane on top. In this case, the message is displayed, your proposed structure exceeds an instrument approach area by 4 feet, and an aeronautical study is needed to determine if it will exceed a standard of subpart C of 14 CFR Part 77. The FAA requests that you file. Filing notice with the FAA via the 7460-1 process requires additional steps to submit a case and undergo an aeronautical study. During the aeronautical study, the FAA will make one of 3 determinations. 1. A determination of no hazard, meaning the subject structure did not exceed obstruction standards and marking lighting is not required. 2. A determination of no hazard with conditions, which means the proposed structure would be acceptable contingent upon implementing mitigation measures, such as the marking and lighting of a structure. 3. Determination of hazard, which means the proposed structure is determined to be a hazard to air navigation. To submit a 7460-1 form, the first thing the user will need to do is navigate to the OE AAA homepage and select New User Registration, whether filing off-airport or on-airport. Enter all the required fields as indicated by the asterisk. Once registered and logged into the OE AAA portal page, the next thing the user will need to do to file is add a new sponsor. Select what is applicable to your situation, whether filing off-airport construction or on-airport. For this scenario, the user will select within the Off-Airport Construction tab. As the message states, a sponsor can be the user, their company, or a client. Users can add as many sponsors as they wish. The important thing to remember is that this should be updated as often as possible, since these are the contact emails or phone numbers that will be used to communicate the status of cases submitted in the portal. A user cannot submit a case without a sponsor. Once sponsors have been added and or updated, the user can now add a new case. Select Add New Case Off-Airport for this sample. First, select the drop-down for sponsor. Next, under Construction Alteration Information, select the type of notice, whether construction, alteration, or existing. Construction would include a structure that has not been built. Alteration is a change to an existing structure, such as the addition of a side-mounted antenna, a change to the marking and or lighting, a change to frequency, or a change to height as examples. Existing would be a correction to the latitude and or longitude, or a correction to the existing height, or if filing for an existing structure that has never been studied by the FAA. For the duration, indicate if temporary or permanent. In this case, we will select temporary. Then indicate the months and days the structure is proposed to be up. Indicate the start and end times in month, day, year for the work schedule. If selecting permanent for the duration, the user will not be able to enter the month, days, but will be able to enter the work schedule. Please see the note on temporary cranes, which reads, "For temporary cranes, does the permanent structure require separate notice to the FAA?" To find out, use the Notice Criteria tool. If separate notice is required, please ensure it is filed. If it is not filed, please state the reason in the description of proposal. This message does not apply to our scenario, as we are only filing for a temporary crane to operate on an existing structure and is not a proposed permanent structure. However, separate filing of both the temporary crane and building would be required if our scenario included a proposed building and crane. State filing. This is not a required field, but the user should provide information if the case has been filed with their state. For the Structure Details tab, enter the most precise geographic coordinates in degrees, minutes, and seconds for the latitude and longitude. Same as used in the sample scenario with the Notice Criteria tool. Coordinates should include to the 100th of a second. As an example, 32 degrees, 9 minutes, and 0.54 seconds north latitude. 110 degrees, 56 minutes, 3.99 seconds west longitude. Horizontal datum, select NAD 83 or NAD 27. Site elevation. Provide the site elevation above sea level rounded to the nearest foot. Structure height. This is the maximum structure height expressed in AGL above ground level. Current height. If a user is filing for either an alteration or existing notice type, provide the current height and later include details in the section labeled Description of Proposal. Minimum operating height, AGL. This field indicates the minimum height necessary to complete the project being filed. The field above labeled Structure Height should be the maximum structure height. However, this field provides details on what the minimum height that is required for the construction or alteration. If an aeronautical study concludes that the max height or structure height may not be approved or may require negotiation or further conditions for approval, providing a minimum height can help avoid delays because the analysis will be done on a lower minimum height. Requested marking lighting. Select the type of marking or lighting to be used. FAA Advisory Circular 70/7460-1, Obstruction Marking and Lighting, is recommended for determining the proper way to light and mark structures affecting navigable airspace. Aircraft Detection Lighting System. A user should only check this box if they are proposing the installation and use of an aircraft detection lighting system. Current marking lighting. Provide the current marking and lighting for the structure if filing an existing or alteration notice. If a new structure, select Not Applicable, Proposed Structure. Nearest city and nearest state. Provide both the city and the state that is nearest to the proposed alteration or existing structure. Description of proposal. Provide as much detail about the structure and related project. If a project requires multiple locations for different structures to be filed, the user can include descriptions of each structure referencing the structure name, used here for each additional filing. Add new locations. As mentioned, a user can file additional structures within the same case. Select Add a new location, and information will need to be entered regarding the structure height, coordinates, site elevation, and other previously entered information from the initial location that was plugged in. Select the structure type and name of structure. FCC number. This field is not required and is only selected if a user is filing for an existing structure or antenna that has been registered with the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. Prior ASN, Aeronautical Study Number. If this is an existing building or alteration that was previously filed and a study was conducted, the user should provide the ASN here. Archived aeronautical study numbers can be found on the OE portal page under the Search Archives. The field above FCC number labeled NOTAM number, does not need to be entered, as this field is only available if a prior ASN number that was filed had an associated Notice to Air Mission, NOTAM, and will auto-populate in such cases. Proposed frequency bands. This is not a required field and only applicable if the proposed structure requires determination of physical or electromagnetic impacts on the operation of air navigation and communication facilities for both civil and military airports. The frequency bands listed indicate the range of electromagnetic frequencies used to transmit signals over a telecommunication network. If the frequency is not available in the list here, select Add Specific Frequency. When all required fields have been selected, click Save. After the case has been saved, the user will be prompted and taken to the map verification screen. For this demonstration, we will not submit an actual case to the FAA so that the FAA does not undertake an aeronautical study for our test scenario. Map verification. In order to submit the case, the coordinates must be verified. Select Verify Map once location and coordinates have been verified again. This case can now be submitted. Once the case has been submitted, users should take note of the project name and aeronautical study number, ASN, that will be given to them. Users should also make sure to add no reply at faa.gov to their contacts to stay informed on the status of cases. With the filing complete, users can return to the portal. Back to the portal page. Users need to be sure to update any sponsor contact information if any of this information changes, because this is who will be contacted with information regarding status of submitted cases. Within the portal, users can comply with requests by adding letter, or check and see what cases have been accepted. When a case is accepted, it has been successfully submitted to the FAA for review. There is also a link provided to find the appropriate FAA contacts for your case. This concludes the process to use the FAA's Notice Criteria tool and to submit a 7460-1 form to the FAA if needed. It is important to note that while the FAA is responsible for determining whether a proposed structure or alteration poses as a hazard to navigable airspace, the agency cannot prohibit any development, even if it is determined to pose as a hazard. It is up to the local land use authority to interpret the results of aeronautical studies and deny or require modifications to a proposed development to protect navigable airspace. Please also note that persons who knowingly and willingly violate the requirements of Part 77 are subject to a civil penalty of up to $1,000 per day until notice is received.